Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this plenary session on regional anti-corruption, NGOs, and transparency institutes, establishing and governing anti-corruption organizations regionally. My name is Paul Miller, and I am from Brunel University in the UK, and I will be your chair for this session. Our presenters in this session are Mr. Gulsarang, who is the Director of Transparency Institute for Guyana, Mr. Drayton, who is the Director for the Institute for Transparency Institute in Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Huguette Labelle, who is Chair of the Board for Transparency International, and Professor Monroe, Director of the National Integrity Action in Jamaica. Our speakers have approximately 7 minutes each, and we will take questions at the end. I think I should point out that Dr. Labelle may leave after her presentation because she has a flight to catch. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I'm on the floor again immediately after, being the last speaker. I didn't quite do enough of a justice to my presentation or to what I would have liked to say, so I ask that I continue. So today I'm going to talk about Transparency Institute Guyana Incorporated. It was established in November 2010. It is a company registered under the Companies Act, Guyana's Companies Act of 1991. It is a nonprofit organization. It is an affiliate of Transparency International. We are not a full-fledged chapter. We are in phase one or stage one, which is affiliate status, or you might want to call it national contact. But we have applied to move into the next stage, which is chapter information status, and our application is pending with Berlin. Our affiliate status expired in February, so we have put in our application for upgrade. Our mandate is to promote good governance practices, transparency, and greater accountability. That's our basic mandate. We also assist in the fight against corruption through public awareness. Our vision for Guyana is that we want the country to be relatively free of corruption, where all citizens can derive the full benefits of state resources, thereby resulting in a significant improvement in the standard of living. Our mission is to assist in reducing corruption through 4 means. 1, through education, 2, awareness, 3, research, and 4, action in partnership with government, civil society, and the private sector. Our early operations were funded by the British and the Canadian governments as part of our outreach programs, and we visited quite a number of locations to sensitize the public on what corruption is all about and what they need to do about it. We also were involved in placing public service advertisements through the newspapers, and we have installed a number of billboards in strategic locations. Say no to corruption. It's a strategic. We plan to intensify our efforts to do so countrywide, and we have prepared quite a number of banners and flyers which we share to sensitize the public on the issue of corruption. In terms of our governance arrangements, we have about 50 members. We hold our annual general meetings. Only last week we held our third annual general meeting. We have 9 directors, including a president and 2 vice presidents. As a board, we hold monthly meetings and we keep minutes, and we normally will hold quarterly meetings with members of the institutes. Our achievements to date, as I said, we have erected a number of billboards with the caption, "Say No to Corruption," and I think that has been well received from the population. We've also, as I said, we've got banners and flyers. We have held periodic meetings with other NGOs like the Private Sector Commission. We went and we are going, and we're still going to the university. There are 2 campuses to sell our messages to students, and the reception has been great. We do a regular fortnightly column in the local newspapers on matters relating to the mandate of our work. We also issue regular press releases on issues and events that require us to take a position. In order to fund our cost of operations, we hold annual fundraising dinners. We have done 2 already, and we have raised enough money to keep our operations going. Professor Monroe was our last guest speaker in the second fundraising dinner. And we also participated, our organization, our directors have participated in a number of international conferences in Germany, Colombia, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of our achievements, I'm continuing with that. We have reviewed Guyana's compliance with the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, and we met with the OAS team in Georgetown. And last Monday, I was supposed to be in Washington to make a further presentation, but Washington was shut down on that day because of snow. And so the meeting was canceled. Monday, yeah. We are a member of an advisory group to the Inter-American Development Bank. That group is a group comprising civil society to give the banks some kind of feel from civil society about how the IDB projects are being executed. And I think that's a good way for the bank to get a feel from civil society, rather than just dealing with the government and hearing what the government says alone. We participated for 2 consecutive years in the announcement of the Corruption Perception Index. The first one was a bad experience where we were attacked by the government. The second one, a little less. So maybe the third one, there is going to be a full acceptance of the CPI. An important event last year that we had was the 9th of December, the International Anti-Corruption Day, and we held a march through the streets of Georgetown. By the way, Georgetown is our capital. Georgetown is the capital of Cayman Islands. But there's a big contrast in terms of appearance. I think we are well supported by civil society everywhere we go. They speak about our work, and they encourage us to move on. And we've done some television programs to sensitize the public about our work. Our key challenge has to do with our ability to attract new members, given the kind of attitude that prevails in Guyana. Nobody wants to be identified with an agency that fights corruption for fear of discrimination or through self-interest. But we will continue to reach out, and we are trying hard to let the government feel that we are in a partnership arrangement with them. And to the extent that we are able to get them to see our way and to embrace our work, then it would have been a significant achievement. But at the moment, it's a bit of a distance to get that to happen. And we've argued with the government that corruption is not necessary. Corruption in the public sector is not necessarily an indictment on the government. The government should embrace our work to fight corruption, and they must not see corruption in the public sector as an attack on them. And they must not take that defensive approach and try to circle the wagons and try to attack us, you know. So if we are successful in all our endeavors, we should see a stronger and stronger Transparency Institute. Another key challenge is our ability to raise funds. As I said, we are surviving at the moment, but we are hoping that the international agencies can chip in. There are a number of projects, EU projects, we have to apply for, and if we are successful, we'll get some funding for outreach programs. Almost done, right? Time is up. We've got a strategic plan which we are working on, and hopefully within the next 3 months, we should be able to finalize our plan. So I just want to stop there because I have only 7 minutes. So thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank Mr. Gulsaran for being so concise with those 7 minutes. And now we invite Dr. Huguette Labelle to the podium. Dr. Labelle.
Good morning. We know that that this panel is between lunch and your time, and that you're probably very eager to get there. I think in looking at the theme of this morning, we can say that the fact that UCCI brought us together and how much we learn from each other during these days, I think is a good indication of the importance of finding additional means of coming together as anti-corruption organizations. Of course, there are different kinds of anti-corruption organizations. You have Ombudsman, you have Integrity Commission, Anti-Corruption Commission. Where does the Auditor General fit in? You have procurement agencies, procurement management agencies. But I think the common denominator is those involved directly in fighting corruption. And you have civil society organizations, which we just heard from also, who are part of that. Now, I think that what's very important is to be able to identify together more clearly what are all the opportunities that we should, what are the purposes, what are the reasons, what is it that we can all benefit from if we put ourselves in common. And of course, you raised a number of those, but I always look at opportunities to share best practices, of course. Best practices in legislation. Some of the countries don't have any, others do. Opportunities to share educational material, campaign material. Opportunity to share the kinds of systems that have been developed in one country, which could be very interesting to another. The capacity of having greater weight. Because if you have 50 different organizations coming together on a particular issue or proposal, it's a little bit better than if it's one organization. And sometimes, as you were talking about the circling the wagon, and sometimes our governments, because we make proposals or we identify problems, do circle the wagon and become defensive. And what you hope is that you can turn this around into a frank, open dialogue of everyone looking for something better. But it's also an opportunity to influence some of the regional organizations, be it the OAS, be it the Inter-American Bank, and also the World Bank and IMF. So again, in French we say l'union fait la force. I'm not quite sure how to say that in English, but I think, the union brings strength. And so these are some, of course, of the areas, but also sharing problems, sharing some of the hindrances, some of the handicaps that different institutions have encountered in their own countries, and, seeking some advice as to how we can change that. Now, of course, the question becomes, does one want a supra-regional one organization? It's up to the people of this region. I'm going to duck on that one. because that is something else. At the same time, I think that to multiply the opportunities that UCCI has presented to be able to bring all of you together in a space which is, free, in a space where people are not concerned about sharing their views and the issues. And what I've heard very often in the last days is how some very practical approaches have been raised. And we heard that this morning from Sierra Leone to a number of countries here, anti-corruption commissions, auditors general. So already this gives us, I think, something very good to look at. So I think that if there was ever a requirement, or if people decided we want to start a new organization, my advice is always make sure you decide what it's going to be when it grows up. Make sure you decide what it is that you want to have. But in the meantime, I think that to be able to develop networks which can work virtually as well as in real time with people in the same room, which of course is better. But once you have gotten to know each other, it might become easy to add to what you're talking about, sort of virtual networks of sharing information between yourselves, and including, I would hope as well, some of the faculties of the universities in the region, and including some of the civil society organizations that are really part of us. I'm thinking of those lead institutions who are there by virtue of their mandate to prevent corruption and tackle it in the broadest way possible. Now, if one wants to go further, then, well, even doing that requires resources. And that's always one of the issues, is how does one raise resources in order to be able to develop something which is more organized, which is more robust. But I would say in the meantime, continue to take every opportunity that you have. And I think we nearly have a commitment from the university here that this is becoming something that will continue to happen every few years. There are other educational institutions in other parts of the Caribbean which can also do the same thing at different times on different aspects of what we're talking about. And also there are international major conferences, whether it's the International Anti-Corruption Conference, and here this is publicity, which will be held in Tunisia this coming October, hoping that all of you will be there, because that's another opportunity to be able to come together. But I would like to suggest not to forget the capacity of developing virtual networks between yourselves to be able to continue the discussions that have started here or even continued here from such previous meetings. If you see me disappear, it's not because I want to avoid questions. It's because I've got to head to Sweden and Berlin, and my flight may not wait for me if I don't get to the airport. So again, I'm very pleased to have been here with you. I've learned a lot. I've taken more notes at this meeting than I've ever had, I think, in any conference, and I've had the opportunity of meeting some exceptional people, and hope that I'll be able to continue to have some discussions with you individually as well. So thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. LaBelle, and we do wish you a safe flight. Now we welcome Mr. Josh Drayton, the Director of Transparency International Institute for Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Drayton. Welcome. All right, now we've just changed the order again, so ladies and gentlemen, it's Professor Trevor Monroe, the Director of National Integrity Action of Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, in the short time that I have at my disposal, I thought it would be very helpful to share with you the experience of the National Integrity Action of Jamaica in a context where many of the territories represented here, Cayman Islands including, do not have a civil society organization dealing with the issue of corruption. My first observation is that our civil society organizing needs to be catching up with and giving organizational expression to the people's concern with anti-corruption. And that concern exists. I cannot think of an election within recent times in the Caribbean in which the issue of corruption has not been a central concern of the campaign for or against the government. So that the concern exists, expressed in electoral campaigns, but also confirmed in surveys done from time to time. You may wish to take a look online at the Latin American Public Opinion Project to see the extent to which the peoples in the Caribbean, Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, show a real concern that corruption is at too high a level. So the first point to observe is that you are catching up with the people by providing some organizational expression to their anti-corruption preoccupations. The second point I would wish to make is that establishing a civil society organization, such as we have done in Jamaica with NIA, must be based on evidence that has been collected, evidence-based analysis. In our case, we did a rapid corruption assessment in 2008, and prior to that, in 2003, we did a national integrity system study of Jamaica. It cannot be broad-based concern. It has to be focused on the areas of particular weakness, and that can only be gathered on the basis of scientific study. The National Integrity System study provides such a framework. Equally, such a foundation has to be based on the real concerns of those who have been in the field. In our case, the public sector leaders who have led the organizations dealing with corruption. And one of the things that we did is established a forum between 2009 and 2011, which brought together public sector leaders for them to explain what, in their conception, were the main needs of the anti-corruption process in Jamaica. And on that basis, on the basis of the evidence and on the basis of that dialogue, we established NIA, launched it in December 2011 on an entirely non-partisan basis, and I wish to emphasize this, in the Caribbean context, where partisanship expressed in the extreme form of tribalism, either based on race or ethnicity, or on the basis of the delivery of benefits, it is very easy for your organization to get trapped as being for one side or another side. And it's very important to preserve that level of independence. The next issue, of course, is to determine what is the menu of activity, what is the practical work that needs to be conducted having formed and established the organization. In our case, there are 5 main areas. Fundamental to all, building public awareness. The people have a general conception that corruption is rife and corruption is bad. That general conception needs to be deepened so that they themselves can make the connection between the aspects of their daily lives, the lack of employment, the inadequacy of the roads, the infrastructure, the connection between that and the general issue of corruption. And therefore, we have invested a great deal of time, energy, and resources into communication products. And I'd invite you to go on our website or on YouTube, Google NIA Jamaica, and you will see some of the products which we show on television in Jamaica. There's a 1-hour documentary film entitled The Cost of Corruption. Put a lot of research into it in order to show that corruption, important as it is as a moral phenomenon, it really is equally as a developmental issue impacting the daily lives of our people. So communication products, critical. Not just on the television, but also face-to-face communication. No substitute for that in the Caribbean. So our town hall meetings in the various communities and districts and towns across the country, very, very important to hear from the people as well as to explain to them our perception. But that's number one. Number two, closing the legislative and institutional gaps. And in that regard, campaign finance reform has been a major focus of ours. We began that even before NIA was established. When I was in the Jamaican Senate, I moved a resolution in 2002 that we needed to have robust campaign finance reform. We're now on the eve of having that in 2014. So 12 years, but if that's how it takes, how long it takes, so be it. Change will come, as we were told by our cultural activists a few days ago. So in closing the legislative and institutional gaps, we have to bear in mind that the laws that have to be passed will only be passed by a majority of the parliamentarians, whether the House of Representatives or the Senate. And therefore, we have to treat them in a differentiated way. If we attack them all as corrupt, then how can we be surprised if we do not get the legislative outcomes outside of a context where there's massive protest and demonstration? And we don't have that in the Caribbean as we do in Brazil or in India at the present time. So that's the second thing, campaigning for the legislation. The third is to develop anti-corruption networks and partnerships. We need to understand that no matter how strong our individual civil society organization, it cannot do it alone. We therefore build partnerships with journalists who have a similar perspective, with private sector entities, and in that last regard, we made a breakthrough in December 2011, just before the election, in that 6 of the major private sector entities disclosed how much money they gave to the political parties. Completely unprecedented in Jamaica's history, not required by law, but by virtue of advocacy, they saw the need to do that, and that gave some impetus to the legislative goal that we have. Fourthly, the facilitation of prosecutions. All of this, in our context, is to little or no avail. If the situation continues where there's one law for the poor, and those who are in high society, whether in parliament or in the private sector, enjoy impunity. If that continues, then the people will say, okay, you're making a good statement, but what about the results? And therefore, we place a great deal of emphasis on facilitating and assisting the public sector entities involved in developing the prosecution necessary to challenge the impunity of the untouchables. And finally, and fifthly, the enhancement of regional and international connections and partnerships. We cannot do it alone inside Jamaica. We cannot do it alone in Jamaica alone, and hence the partnerships with our friends in Trinidad, partnership in Barbados, most of all the partnership with Transparency International, which allows us to access the experience of 100 different units across the world, is invaluable. Partnership with the Organization of American States, participating in their peer review to see the extent to which Jamaica is compliant with the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, all very important. Finally, internal governance. We have to make sure that we practice what we preach, because you can be sure that the corrupt are going to look for ways and means to put you on the defensive, and they've tried that with us in Jamaica. Who are these guys talking for? Are they puppets of some external force? And of course, we declare we're a registered organization. Our audited accounts are available for public scrutiny. And we make it clear that our main international partnership support comes from the United States Agency for International Development and the United Kingdom Department for International Development. And those who would accuse us of being agents of foreign powers would best look at the range of organizations, governmental, which USAID and DFID support in Jamaica, to see whether that attack would have any credibility. So we have to be very transparent. Our board has to be chosen in terms of the integrity of its members as well as their impeccable reputations. We have a staff of 7, not a large staff in a country of 2.7 million, but hardworking, which raises the challenges that I wish to conclude on. Funding. absolutely important. If we don't broaden and deepen our sources of funding, that will limit our capacity to strengthen and develop our civil society organization. And that is a huge challenge because not many private sector entities in our countries are willing to fund civil society anti-corruption bodies because they're never sure whether they at some point will be the target of our concern with integrity and anti-corruption. The second challenge, and the final one I'll mention, is perhaps the best challenge of all. The Global Corruption Barometer of 2013 including Jamaica for the first time. And what it found is that 77% of the Jamaican people want to get involved with an anti-corruption organization. That's 77%. The global average was 54%. So the work is having an impact, but then that presents a serious problem. How does a small organization facilitate the desires, the aspirations of the people to become more involved? And that can only be done, again, in partnership. It cannot be done by us alone, and therefore we place a great deal of emphasis on partnering with our friends in the church, our friends in the private sector, in order to facilitate the people's desire to get involved. Because that is ultimately what will ensure a corruption-free Jamaica. The engagement of the people alongside anti-corruption organization, alongside anti-corruption champions in the public sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Monroe. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Josh Drayton, the Director of Transparency Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, will close us out of this plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, my apologies. My name is Josh Drayton. I'm a director at the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute. So in the meantime, as the guys deal with the setup, I would start my presentation. No. Yes, the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute was founded in 1998, just a couple years after TI was founded. And we've had a very long and interesting history over the past 16 years. A bit about us, and right. So, as with most of the other transparency chapters around the world, we are in fact registered as a non-for-profit under the Companies Act of 1995 for Trinidad and Tobago. And we have really aimed our strategies along a couple of lines which I'm going to introduce you to in a bit. But I just want to share our vision, and our vision is really the shared vision of TI, Transparency International, which is really a world in which government, politics, business, civil society, and the daily lives of people are free of corruption. And our mission is to work towards a country and a region that are free of corruption. We have a number of core values, but before you can read the core values, I'm not going to state them specifically. I want to say that many times we think about government, and we've heard a whole lot about what government can do. We've heard a lot about what the private sector should do. But my focus is really on civil society, because many times we forget about civil society. Traditionally, civil society was seen to be the third arm, third sector. But civil society in the new literature coming out is in fact seen as the glue that holds the private sector and government together. And as a result, civil society organizations have an important role to play in the fight against corruption. And that's really what we attempt to do at Transparency in Trinidad. Our structure is a very simple structure. It's not very complicated. We have 11 directors, 2 full-time staff, and expanding from time to time with interns, etc. We have around 144 individual members, and basically membership is annually, so persons can sign up, pay 200 TT dollars, and they become a member. But we also have corporate members. Corporate members are determined based on their profit margins, and their fees range from $1,000 to $5,000 annually. I mentioned our approach. Our approach is a three-pronged approach, and it's not only hierarchical as seen here, but it's also very frontal at the same time, so we can apply this in a very horizontal way. The first is public education. We recognize that quite often many persons speak about corruption, but we just don't know. We use that all the time, and we say that person is corrupt. But what kind of corruption are you talking about? Petty, we heard about that. Grand corruption, public sector, political corruption, nepotism, bribery, what? So I think it's our role to also educate persons about corruption in all its forms. And we have done so through a number of public education programs, which I'll be touching on shortly. The other area is empowerment. Once you are armed with some knowledge, you feel empowered to do something about it, whether it's in your own social groups, individually, at work, or in wider society. But the final one is advocacy. And again, our programs have been linked to these three areas. In terms of advocacy, we're speaking about influencing government policy, and that's important. So it's not only do we educate persons on one leg, but we also feel the need for persons to do something, but for us to also do something, and other persons, other stakeholders within Trinidad and Tobago to join with us to fight against corruption. And we have, in fact, partnered with the JCC, and you heard Afra yesterday speaking more about the role of the JCC in public procurement, and being able to work with the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, Chambers of Commerce, etc., and being able to influence public policy and, of course, redraft legislation related to public procurement. We had a whole lot of activities over the last 16 years, and it was very difficult for me to figure out, okay, what do I pick out as important, because all I can say were important. So we have done quite a number of things in the media. You can Google us, and then you'll see a whole lot of stuff. What we've been fortunate was, in fact, to have some very important persons being chairs of transparency, and they have really taken that vision forward. And that's really one of the things. But the strategy, again, has changed over time. And I want to emphasize this because I know a number of, especially Jamaica as well as Guyana, are in the process of being accredited as a national chapter. And for those persons who may be interested in forming chapters, I want to emphasize that sometimes this strategy will change, as in most organizations, same as in transparency, based on the chairman of the organization. And sometimes the chair may determine the strategy, whether it's more confrontational, or perhaps whether they prefer backdoor meetings with government ministers. And that's important because I think for us over a period of time, sometimes it was seen that we were commenting too much on public sector corruption and not enough on private sector corruption. Again, depending on the chair. Then other times we were very vocal. So for example, we've been told from time to time by different political parties that when we're in power, you all have a lot to say. When another party is in power, you all have nothing much to say. Again, based on the change of the chairmanship. So I want to at least put that out there, so that in fact influenced a lot of our work. Time is up soon. But we have done a number of things, and I want to emphasize on our most recent activities, which I'm just going to itemize. One is, I mentioned the public procurement issue. The other thing is that we have recently formed a youth arm, which is very important, and we formed that youth arm at the University of the West Indies. And within the first 6 weeks, they actually held the first town hall meeting at the university, where they were able to discuss issues related to the culture of corruption. And of course, we had about 15 or 16 countries there present because it's at the university. The other thing I want to speak about is our civil society accountability toolkit. In 2010, we went through an entire process of designing an internal accountability toolkit for civil society organizations, simply because civil society organizations, again, tend to ask everybody else to be accountable, but fail to institute similar measures within their organizations. And this toolkit has been used widely throughout Trinidad and Tobago. We have actually held a number of workshops, and totaling about 400 to 500 participants thus far who have been included, civil society organizations. Other things that we have done is to have this annual anti-corruption conference, which is not an academic conference, but mainly a stakeholders dialogue on issues related to corruption. And the final one is our town hall meetings, which we have started to hold. Now, the anti-corruption conference, in fact, the issues discussed there tend to be fleshed out in our town hall meetings throughout the rest of the year. And those are, in fact, just a fraction of what we have been able to do over the period, in addition to other activities. Since time is up, you can ask me questions, and I'll be able to respond specifically to the items that we have done. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we are going to have only two questions. Only two questions. There's one there. Right, so that's one, and perhaps we'll have another after, but only two questions for our speakers. Some mic, please. Loud voice. No, she's coming with the mic.
Thank you. Very quick one to Prof. You spoke about funding, and then I think we know how crucial that is for an anti-corruption agency, whether it is the non-governmental type or the one that is backed by government, I mean statutory, like the TCI. Have you considered the implications of probably going to private sector for funding? And you made a very good point immediately after you said that, because you were saying they tend to be reluctant to come forward because they don't know whether they will eventually be investigated or become, a subject of your anti-corruption campaign or initiative. My question then is, would you consider it advisable, even if they do dispose themselves to funding your agency? Will you consider it advisable, given the fact that it might create a perception of undue obligation to them, one way or the other?
Thank you.
Private sector, whether you feel you need to get money from the private sector and the issues related to the obligation, or you can't comment on the issues.
From Ghana's perspective, we...
Is on?
Josh, you want to go? Yeah. The question, Eugene, is whether we would accept from the private sector. Yeah. Yeah. We request funding and assistance based on our program, based on our activities, and I have to say that our efforts so far, to use the biblical analogy, has fallen on rocky ground. Our friends in the private sector, and they are friends, some of them support what we say by public statements, but moving beyond public statements to provide funding has been very difficult. We have support from 2 or 3 major firms, and in particular, I should mention support from the communication companies. Flow Cable Channel have carried our advertisements and our communication products free of cost to the tune of, at some point, $2 million Jamaican dollars per month. So that has been extremely valuable. And we don't do a background check unless there is some particular reason to suspect that a particular private sector firm is engaged in some improper conduct, either as a result of reports of the Contractor General, which we study very carefully, or otherwise. We don't have a difficulty. We don't screen the contributions. and we don't have a flood of them coming in order to screen.
Thank you.
Eugene, I just would like to say, in addition to that, because you're speaking about the challenges, we were presented with a case a couple years ago where a particular very large company was a corporate member and failed to have the publishers audit the financials after about 3 or so years. We wrote to them and we told them that we would appreciate if they published their annual financial report. And they complied, but we took that step. We, at the board, we thought about it, and we said, here's what. If they don't, they'll no longer be a corporate member. And you have to, I guess, in some way diversify your income in that way, that you say, here's what. You're getting funding from a number of persons, but you're not going to compromise your integrity. So that's the kind of stance that we have started to take at transparency. Well, it wasn't difficult. It wasn't easy, but again, you have to take it.
And we would never consider, even contemplate accepting money if they didn't publish their audited financial statements. So that would be a necessary minimum.
Yeah, in the Ghana situation.
You want to use my mic? Yeah. You can share.
In Ghana, we received small amounts of contribution from the private sector, and so far that has not been a problem. But it has been brought to attention that we have to be careful. Maybe a major government contractor might want to. In that situation, we will have to exercise our judgment whether or not to decide to accept contributions from those people who might want to try to influence our work.
Thank you. Question there. Final question.
One question. We have been seeing fragments of insularity right throughout the Caribbean. CARICOM has been struggling. We've not been able to, as a Caribbean, become cohesive on matters of economic interest. How can we reasonably expect that we can address corruption from a Caribbean standpoint? Given that CARICOM has been struggling, there's been discrimination throughout the Caribbean. I mean, I know one instance where a woman was suing some other country because of being unfairly treated. How can we really be cohesive on any matter for that?
The question that you're posing is in fact asking what can we do on the regional front to curb corruption? What is the question? My apologies.
As a Caribbean, we've not been very cohesive in terms of economic matters.
Okay.
If we were more united, arguably we could have accomplished a lot more. There's a lot of insularity within the region. There's discrimination, there's a lot of differences. How can we reasonably expect to address corruption on a Caribbean level if CARICOM has been struggling?
Oh, I follow you. Yeah. Well, we have to start where we are. We have to start with those territories where there's a sufficient interest and basis to develop anti-corruption organization. And I believe that that seed of interest exists in each area. Look at here in Cayman. It would be impossible for me to believe, given the turnout here over the last couple of days, and the turnout when I spoke here in November 2012, that there are not persons here who have a definite interest in moving beyond organizing lectures and conferences into developing organization. And I believe the same would be true of each of our territories. The trick then is to find a way to convert interest into organization. And if we do that in each of our territories, then we'll be developing the basis for cross-territorial collaboration. Already, Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, we collaborate. I go to Trinidad, speak at their meetings, the Guyana situation, and vice versa. So what we do is build a network slowly on the foundations of the individual organization. And we intend to do better than CARICOM. The governments are failing abysmally, but that does not indicate that civil society organizations need to fail equally. This is the case of Turks and Caicos. It was 2009. I visited Turks and Caicos, interviewed Eugene, did the National Integrity System study. One of the main recommendations, political party registration and funding. 2012, it's there now. So 2 or 3 years in Turks and Caicos, 12 years in Jamaica, change will come.
I just want to respond to that question briefly to say that in 2010, the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute actually held a Caribbean outreach project where Trevor was present, some representatives from throughout the region, to start to establish transparency chapters in all the countries. We had Grenada, St. Vincent, Guyana, right up the line, Antigua present. And only 2 of the participants, Jamaica and Guyana, actually started national chapters. But there's an ongoing thing with us because we have had continued meetings where we have, I guess, enlarging the pool of interested persons to establish chapters. There's also discussion happening at Transparency Institute in Trinidad, as well as with TI Americas, where we're thinking about an OECS regional chapter. And also proposals are being discussed about the possibility of having a Caribbean chapter, more of an umbrella type organization. The challenge again is that unlike most of the other heads of government meetings around the world, CHOGM, Summit, etc., for CARICOM, when CARICOM has its meetings, there are no civil society meetings happening simultaneously. So the question is, how can civil society in some way infiltrate or at least get its voice heard at the level of CARICOM? What we have decided to do is the opposite, to do a bottom-up approach, see? So have that strong civil society presence in the various territories and hope that at least by our advocating from the bottom up, our governments and different stakeholders raise those issues at the level of CARICOM. But it's a challenging thing. I'm not going to say it's easy.
I have long heard the topic of corruption almost being bounced around as a political rhetoric. Do you now believe that it is a cultural problem?
Can we take that question after, because we have run out of time, ladies and gentlemen, and we want to thank our presenters for contributing to this session. The key things I hear coming out of this session are collaboration between institutions, campaign financing, communication, and the common enemy approach to tackling corruption within and between states, research and evidence-based policy and practice and interventions, civic engagement and partnerships, including funding, or the considerations around supranational, super-regional organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this session. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, gentlemen.